Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Let's begin with a quick economic update. Xiao Gang, the former head of China's Securities Regulatory Commission, has made a rare admission about the nation's stock market and currency policies, observing on a fact that all knew but was largely unspoken. In videoed remarks made at a seminar in mid-November at the PBC School of Finance at Tsinghua University and published this week online, the former top official revealed that China's top leadership set unofficial so-called psychological targets for the markets. Xiao shared that the Shanghai Composite Index's 3,000-point mark is one such psychological goal, which has no scientific basis, but is seen as a critical benchmark by Chinese leadership. He explained that this target, ingrained in the minds of policymakers for years, quote, is not based on economic fundamentals, but rather a perception held by China's leadership, end quote. Further, Xiao discussed the leadership's past concerns over the RMB weakening beyond the $7 level. Despite these fears, when the currency finally reached this point, the markets did not experience the expected turmoil, highlighting a disconnect between the government's anxiety and the actual market reaction. UK-based The Financial Times writes that Xiao's comments are significant as they shed light on the sensitive nature of China's policymaking, especially regarding financial markets, which are seen as key tools for economic stability and social control. The remarks also suggest that the government is more involved in market manipulation through entities like the National Team, which intervenes in the markets at lower levels to prevent drastic declines. Peking University professor of finance Michael Pettis observed on the comments, quote, "This isn't such a big deal as I don't think there are many people who follow Chinese markets who didn't already take this for granted, but for someone to say this out loud is highly unusual, even for a retired senior official," end quote. Next up, this week US-based The Wall Street Journal and UK-based Reuters are reporting that investigators suspect that the crew of the Yipeng 3, a Chinese-owned bulk carrier, deliberately severed 2 critical undersea data cables in the Baltic Sea last week. The ship, a massive 225-meter-long vessel loaded with Russian fertilizer, allegedly dragged its anchor along the seabed for over 100 miles. Damaging vital infrastructure. While the ship is Chinese-owned, officials believe Russian intelligence agencies, rather than the Chinese government, orchestrated the sabotage. The Yipeng 3 departed from Ust-Luga, a Russian Baltic port, on the 15th of November. Investigators are now focused on whether the ship's captain acted under pressure or directives from Russian operatives. A senior European investigator remarked on the probability of the incident being accidental, noting, quote, "It's extremely unlikely that the captain would not have noticed that his ship dropped and dragged his anchor, losing speed for hours and cutting cables on the way," end quote. This event is seen as part of a broader pattern of attacks on European infrastructure allegedly tied to Russia. Intelligence and law enforcement officials emphasize that there is no evidence implicating the Chinese government in the incident, but Russia's involvement, writes both outlets, appears likely. The episode echoes a similar incident in October of last year when the Chinese-registered New Polar Bear severed a gas pipeline and telecommunications cable connecting Finland and Estonia, with Russian soldiers reportedly aboard the ship. Sweden has called for the Yipeng 3 to return to its waters to aid in the investigation. The Swedish Prime Minister stressed that no formal accusations have been made against China, but underscored the urgency of uncovering the truth behind these breaches. The timing of these events aligns with closer cooperation between China and Russia too, particularly in Arctic shipping routes. On the 27th of November, that is Wednesday of this week, China's Minister of Transport, Liu Wei, attended the inaugural meeting of a joint subcommittee on Arctic shipping routes with Russia, reflecting deeper ties between the two sides. While such collaborations may be strategic, incidents like the alleged sabotage raise questions about the geopolitical dimensions of this partnership. Next up, and while we're on this topic, this week the G7 Foreign Ministers Summit published a joint statement sharply criticizing China, particularly its alleged support for Russia's war in Ukraine. The ministers expressed concern about Chinese firms allegedly supplying weapons and dual-use materials to Russia, accusing them of enabling Moscow to sustain its war efforts. The statement read, quote, "China must prevent its companies from transferring weapons, especially attack unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, dual-use materials, including weapons, components, and equipment," end quote. While the language implies a red line, it leaves room for ambiguity, as it does not directly accuse the Chinese government of involvement, but emphasizes its responsibility to regulate corporate actions. The G7's tougher rhetoric reflects escalating tensions, but it remains unclear what substantive actions, if any, the group can take. The statement also criticized China's, quote, "non-market policies and practices," end quote, accusing Beijing of creating harmful overcapacity, distorting markets, and undermining global economic resilience. These economic practices, the G7 warned, threaten industries and workers in member nations. Beyond Ukraine, the G7 addressed broader concerns about China too, citing issues such as tensions in the East and South China Seas, human rights in Xinjiang, Tibet, and Hong Kong, and Beijing's stance on Taiwan. The ministers called for China to respect international obligations under diplomatic conventions and avoid undermining democratic institutions. So, once again, plenty of rhetoric, but no teeth. In response, Chinese state media dismissed the G7's criticisms as hypocritical and reflective of double standards. An editorial in state-run China Daily accused the G7 of interfering in China's internal affairs while ignoring their own contributions to global crises, such as instability in the Middle East. The editorial also rejected claims that China's trade practices with Russia or its neighbors equate to enabling aggression. Next up, we have one more update to cover, but just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode, don't forget to hit the like button. Liking, sharing, and subscribing is a tremendous help for the channel. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links is also in the description below for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. And finally for today, recent violent attacks in China, particularly a car ramming incident in Zhuhai that killed 35 people and injured a dozen more, have raised alarms within the country's leadership. The tragic event has prompted senior officials to call for urgent measures to prevent similar incidents and ensure social stability. This is being treated very seriously in Beijing, and we've been following this developing story over the last few weeks. Veteran China analyst Bill Bishop observed yesterday, quote, "The recent meetings of senior officials in the Political and Legal Affairs Commission system make it clear that the top leadership has grown increasingly concerned about the recent spate of mass attacks." End quote. Yin Bai, Secretary General of the Central Political and Legal Affairs Commission, emphasized at a special meeting this week the need for improved, quote, "risk prevention and control at the source," end quote, urging the use of technology to better predict and prevent potential threats. Of course, here he's talking about greater surveillance infrastructure across the country, in a country that already has fairly robust state surveillance systems in place. During a tour of Zhejiang province this week, Yin highlighted the importance of data analysis to identify and screen out individuals at risk of committing violent attacks. This is to use data and AI through surveillance technology to try to predict individuals committing crimes and intervening before the crimes are committed. So we're talking about Minority Report here. He stressed that by leveraging technological tools, authorities can improve early warnings and preventative measures, making law enforcement more effective at the grassroots level. These comments are part of broader efforts by the government to enhance security and manage public safety concerns, particularly in light of a rising number of extreme incidents. In addition to the official responses, the Chinese government has also been scrutinizing social factors that may contribute to such violent attacks. A commentary in party mouthpiece, People's Daily, condemned these attacks, calling them unforgivable and vowing that perpetrators would face severe legal consequences. The piece underscored the government's stance that individuals who resort to violence to take revenge on society would not receive any sympathy and would instead face public condemnation. Experts have suggested that addressing the root causes of these attacks, such as poverty, mental illness, and social isolation, could prevent future tragedies. There are calls for a more robust mental health intervention system too, as well as enhanced enhanced conflict resolution strategies. Unlike surveillance, this is quite underinvested in China. As China grapples with these challenges, the leadership's focus on strengthening surveillance and risk management systems reflects growing concern over maintaining social stability and preventing further violence as China's economy slows. An increasing number of people on the margins feel that the agreement between state and the people for greater prosperity is broken. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Friday, have a restful weekend, and I will see you all tomorrow.